Okay, so why are we learning about our minds? So we can improve them, so we can have a fundamentally happier mind, right? Okay, so let's begin our class today, our learning about consciousness and reflecting uh, on the mind by generating a powerful and clear motivation for our time here together, right? Our energy, our reflection, our learning, our questioning, for all of this to go towards a greater goal of benefiting as many people as possible. In fact, why not just all living beings everywhere? So if you already have a Buddhist practice and like to recite the refuge prayer, you can do that on your own, and then I'll just give a minute or two of silence. Okay, wonderful. Now, this is just a little extra comment or question, actually. Have any of you ever wondered before, well, why even do prayers at all ever anyway? Yes, good. Okay, I wondered as well. And it's sort of one of these things that you sort of you figure out as you go along, and if you try it, it's kind of through experimentation, you see how it impacts you. But my personal experience has been that one of the deepest values of doing prayers, and again, in the Buddhist tradition, since there is no, kind of external source of our well-being, like a God, that we rely on to give us our salvation, our happiness, our freedom from problems, but it's all that comes from your own action. That's not what we're praying for, right? We're not praying for some other being to, right, come and save us, right? So what are we praying for? Well, a variety of things, but essentially the prayers, like the refuge prayer, the words are, I take refuge until I am enlightened or awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then the next part is the bodhicitta part, the altruistic motivation. By the merit I create by practicing giving and the other perfections, I will achieve Buddhahood, or may I achieve Buddhahood for the welfare of all living beings. Again, there's a variety of slightly different wordings and translations there. No problem. But what we're doing essentially is, right, we're using these words that guide our minds into a certain track, right, of thinking, of feeling, of experiencing. So it's like we learn about what the Buddha is, who the Buddha is, what the Dharma is, the teachings of the Buddha, right? The Buddha is the teacher, the Dharma is the teaching, and then the Sangha is the community of people who have made some, genuine progress already towards that awakening by learning and meditating on the Dharma. So that community of people they don't have to be ordained people, but the ordained people sort of is the representative symbol of the Sangha. But it's really anyone who actually has deep experience of Dharma. Okay, so we say, I go to them for refuge. Now, refuge is an interesting word just because we don't really find it that often, right? In kind of regular use, right? Um, really what we're saying though is, I'm, you know, putting my future welfare and the potential for me to, yeah, to prevent, right, to be protected from problems, suffering, misery, depression, right? To be protected from these things we don't like. I'm putting my, uh, my confidence, right? My spiritual direction into the the hands of this particular teacher and this particular teaching and the people that are practicing this particular teaching. So it really comes down to, if we get strong confidence that the Dharma, the teachings, are really capable of preventing our problems from arising in the future, preventing us from having more suffering, more misery, more, all the causes of the misery, the selfish thinking, right? All the irritation, the anger, all the attachment, all the craving, all these things that are going to bring us more problems. So if we really see that the Dharma has the potential to free us from those things, then naturally we want to, well, utilize it, right? Rely on it. And so when we recite the prayer, that's like saying, like, it's a reminder, right? Reminding yourself, but it's also just these words. They just are like a track that, if you have a trolley cart or a train on a track, it doesn't veer off and go somewhere else. It sets a track for your mind to go in, so that you sort of have this kind of repeated way of thinking, a repeated confirmation that this is the spiritual direction that I really find to be beneficial, meaningful, useful, practical. And I'm going to, train my mind, make that track like in your own brain, right? The actual patterns of your thinking and neural pathways, make those deeper, stronger. And same with the altruistic motivation, right? It's like you decided, like, this is the best way to live, to be completely altruistic and serve all living beings. Do whatever I can to help all living beings. Everyone wants happiness. I'm not special or more important than anybody else. So I might as well work for the welfare of all. Right? So you make that track, right? That track in your mind through the words. These words that help the reflection, the thoughts to sort of guide your way of feeling. So the thoughts sort of guide our emotions, right? Okay. So the thought, may I become awakened for the welfare of all beings, that brings with it, right? Especially if you really sit quietly with that thought and really imagine, like, living beings, like people that people that you saw today, or we'll see later today, people at the coffee shop, people at the gas station, like your teachers, your coworkers, your colleagues. Think of them, think of bringing them happiness, think of their problems, think of relieving them from their problems. That brings with it a real compassion, right? The emotion. So this is sort of an introduction to where we're going with the class today, which is about thought versus experience, right? So what I was saying in relation to prayer, that's related to our thoughts, right? Now the thoughts also bring experience. Okay, is this a question that anyone has actually ever thought about, or I should say maybe based on what you've learned about and spiritual teachings in general, not just Buddhism, but based on what you've learned about any kind of spiritual teaching, like, has this question come up for you, or this kind of, even to make this distinction at all, thought versus experience? Okay, a little bit. I think someone has their hand, but it's got frozen, so I'm not sure. If someone wants to say, maybe before we start, anything about it, just like, what do you think is the difference between thought and experience? Let's put the question that way. Would anyone like to say something? I think the video at the house there is
yeah.
frozen,
In Melinda's group, I think people had their hand up. If you want to unmute yourself, or if you want to put it in the chat.
Oh yeah, you're hosting, so you.
There we go.
But I think since it's frozen, that might make it a little challenging.
That's interesting. You're frozen. No, we're unmuted. We're good. I don't think we're
You're
frozen.
good.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yep.
Good. So you froze actually completely when you posed the question, so we missed the whole question. What you stated in the beginning, how we were going to start what we were going to start discussing. If you could just repeat that.
Sure. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, let's just get into it then, and I'm sure there'll be more chance for sharing and different thoughts as we go. Okay. So I'll do the screen share. Let me just. Okay. Do I actually? I think I might need. Am I allowed to do a screen share right now?
I
Yeah.
can, you got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thought versus experience. I was just introducing that the way I was talking about prayers as a way to sort of put a track for our thinking, and which then brings up sort of different kinds of emotions, different experiences, that is a lead into what we're talking about today, thought versus experience. But it's well, let's go into what this distinction is about here. Now, we're going to start just a little bit of review from the last couple of classes, or more of the first class where it was just the overview of the mind itself, right, in general. So just the overview of how to think of the mind, okay? And I will say that the last two classes that are going to be in this 8-week course, and they'll be taught by Venerable Puja Dabral, who's a professor of Buddhist studies. She's going to go into much more detail about the sort of a certain way of categorizing different kinds of minds that will repeat some of the stuff we're going into today. I'll just say that. So there'll be some more detail to come. Okay. So we have this overview, how to think of the mind. So the first thing, don't just think of the mind. That's the first thing I want to emphasize, re-emphasize, right? When we're talking about our minds, it's not as though there is like some ethereal, unchanging entity that's kind of always there, the same throughout our lives. And it's like more, I mean, that would be what? That would be more like the notion of a soul, right? And that somehow it's like this, there's this unchanging essence or part of us that just kind of goes through different experiences. No, the mind is constantly changing, and it is a continuum that persists over time, but it's a continuum in such that every moment is newly arising and ceasing, right? Every moment there's a new arising of some kind of experience, and then the moment it arises, it's immediately already going extinct or what we call disintegrating. I mean, the word we use often is disintegrating, okay? So every moment there's this disintegration, but there's also many, many different components of any given moment. Any given instance of a mind has many different components, right? And then, like we talked about before, there's different categories, different ways of categorizing. So we can categorize, like the main topic for today, conceptual versus non-conceptual mind. We can categorize like the first class 2 weeks ago where we talked about the 6 different consciousnesses. Well, those are the primary domains of experience, right? The 6 primary domains of experience. What were they again? Right? Visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, and the mental. Those 6 main domains, right? And the elements of cognition, which with any one of those given 6 domains of consciousness in any moment of any instance of them, there are going to be many different like factors to that mind, like different aspects that allow us to just cognize something, or to have all the, infinite variety of emotions and thoughts and dreams and memories and projections, all these things, right? There are many different elements going on, and that they're also what allow us to meditate, right? To engage in some kind of analytical reflection and reasoning, right? Those are all different elements of cognition that are together with the primary domain, especially the mental consciousness. That's the most active, you could say, right? And then we also have a way of distinguishing different categories into the correct versus the mistaken consciousnesses. This is extremely, extremely important to get a sense that there are mistaken consciousnesses and there also are correct consciousnesses. Okay, so what might be an example of a mistaken consciousness if anyone wants to try out? And again, I guess the best way is, yeah, you either raise your hand digitally or just raise it and we'll see it. Well, there's a lot, I mean, countless examples, but just like the simple, very simple example, okay. You're driving down the road, it's dark at night, there's some object in the middle of the road, okay. Maybe it's a bag that blew out of someone's truck. Maybe it's a, jacket someone discarded. Some object, inanimate object, but you perceive it to be what? An animal, right? Or some other thing, a roadkill or an animal, when it's really just some plastic bag or something, right? Everyone has some similar experience to that? Probably, right? At least if you drive. So this is a mistake in consciousness, right? Why? Because the way that the object appears and the way that you're apprehending it or perceiving it to be is in is out of accord, right? It's out of sync with the way the object actually is. Again, the mind is a subject and it's always engaged with or interacting with some object, any mind at any time. Okay, so the object there was, right, plastic bag, but you're perceiving it to be an animal. Okay, that's a mistake. So the correct consciousness would be, well, as you get closer, or your headlights kind of point and shine on it, and then you see, oh, that's just a bag. Right? Your perception actually changes, right? Okay, so that's a correct consciousness. Now, when it comes to ourselves, right, it's similar, but takes a lot more time to correct the mistake. So it's one way of perceiving ourselves that's mistaken is to perceive ourselves as permanent. In other words, feeling like I'm the same person now as I was when I woke up this morning, or yesterday, or 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when in reality, there's nothing the same about the person who's here right now from with the one who was there this morning that woke up. There's a cause effect relationship, right? There's nothing the same about those two people. Okay, so that's a mistaken consciousness. And it's funny because it's something that's so experientially fundamental to our lives and how we just assume the world to be, how we just assume us to be, that we don't really think about it as being sort of its own consciousness, right? But it is. It's just in the background. It's so deeply ingrained in us that we don't even question or really acknowledge that it's there. But it is. It's a belief, right? It may be, not a learned belief, right? It may not be a belief that you had to like go to Sunday school and hear about, right? But it's just an innate sense, and that's its own consciousness. There's a consciousness perceiving yourself to be permanent, right? Okay. And so to correct that, well, what you need to do is to learn about impermanence, and not just learn about it through hearing and reading, but also through reflecting and analyzing, using reasoning, and then meditating, right? Using single pointed concentration together with your sort of analytical insight there. And that can then really transform how you perceive yourself. It can really transform your mind, right? Correcting that consciousness. But it's much more difficult than just going closer and seeing, oh no, it's really a bag, right? You have to put more effort than that. Okay, so there's also many different perspectives with which you can define an instance of mind. So like one moment, let's like say like, I have, okay, there's a mug here, right? So we can have an I consciousness that's perceiving a mug, right? So that's sort of characterizing the consciousness in terms of the object, right? An I consciousness perceiving a mug, right? But you can also characterize the consciousness in terms of, as it says here, like an element of the cognition or emotion. So you could say attachment aimed at this mug, right? If you just say an I consciousness, that's now you've defined it in terms of which of the 6 domains of consciousness it is, the visual, right? If you say attachment, now it's mental, right? Now there's something that you have a thought of possession, of ownership, of desire. I like this mug, right? Okay, so this is different ways of characterizing, even though it's the same, in one sense, it's the same entity of consciousness we're talking about, but we can talk about it in different ways because there's so many different aspects to any given consciousness. Okay, now the last line, the last bullet here, don't forget this, please. It's so important. You must gain insight into your mind, your own mind, through your own empirical observation, right? So this means throughout your life, as you go about your day, kind of checking in with yourself. There's a very beautiful verse that is in the text called the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. And the verse goes, in summary, because it's the last verse, so it's like summarizing all these other practices. In summary, whatever you are doing, ask yourself, what's the state of my mind? And with constant mindfulness and introspection, accomplish the good of others. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So remembering throughout the day to check in on yourself, right? And then to make special time to have that complete focused, practice time for really doing a deeper reflection and meditation, because it's just the beautiful thing about our minds is that when we give that space, we can really gain unique experience that it's just not possible when the mind is just too bombarded by sense stimulus. It's just not possible. So we really have to concentrate the mind in order to gain deeper insight into what's going on there. Okay, let's go into then today's topic more. So what is thought? Okay, well, it's this is one of the ways of categorizing, right, into thought versus non-thought. Another way of saying this is conceptual versus non-conceptual. Okay, it means the same thing. So it's conceptual consciousness. What does that mean? Well, it engages its objects. It engages with objects through some kind of a medium. Those three bullets, they're all just different words for the same thing. You could call it a mental model, a mental image, a world model, conceptual image. And then some of the Buddhist technical literature will use this phrasing, a meaning generality. Meaning generality. Why? Well, because it abstracts the object, right, and generalizes. So it generalizes many different instances, things that occur at different times, right, things that have different characteristics, and then it just lumps them all into like a general concept. So if you think about your mother, okay, whether she's alive or not, you can still think about her, right? You think about your mother, and when you just close your eyes and imagine your mother, visualize your mother, you have an image of your mother. There's something there, right? You have a sense of who your mother is. But I mean, how many different hair colors has your mother gone through throughout her life, right? How many different outfits has she worn, right? Sometimes she's smiling, sometimes she's certainly not smiling. But we still have just a generalized image, right? So it's not like you like pick one specific time, your mother at, on, December 20th, 1990, and that's, it's just general, okay? So that's how conceptual thought works. How that happens exactly is a deep topic of study that, really there's amazing set of literature around, amazingly profound and insightful in the Buddhist tradition, but we won't go into it, but I highly encourage anyone who's interested to try and learn more through the different texts that are there. Although to be frank, there's not that much that's available in English still at this time, but that will change for sure. Okay, so one thing that it does also is that it's sort of, this isn't really the exact literal correct way of saying it, but it's close enough. It sort of fuses objects together with Well, with sound, meaning with language, right? With words. So when you, I mean, look at the mug again, right? We have a mug here, and we all know it's called a mug. Okay, a coffee mug, a ceramic mug, whatever. It's a mug. Now, it's not like the word mug ever actually gets mixed into into this object here, right? It's just a label, right? It's just a designation. It's imputed, completely imputed by our conceptual thoughts, right? But when we actually think mug, there's some kind of verbalization going on, right? So it's like the conceptual mind has this way of sort of there's this cognition of things as though they could be mixed or fused with a word, right? In reality, there's never any word that's getting mixed with this mug. It's always just the porcelain earth, right? But our conceptual mind is able to sort of divide the world up using language in a way so that it sees things as though they can be mixed with language and terms. And of course, it's a very useful object there. More useful. So that's the funny thing about the difference between the conceptual mind and then the non-conceptual mind. Conceptual mind, you can imagine a mug, you can imagine your mother, but they're not going to actually do anything, right? When you see the mug with your visual consciousness, which is non-conceptual, you can actually like pick it up. You can touch it and use your tactile consciousness and your taste consciousness. So there's actually something that's really functioning there, right? Creating results, creating effects in the real world. And with the conceptual mind, with thoughts, it's just imagination, right? It doesn't mean that they're always wrong, right? Because I can like imagine that mug and I can analyze it and know that it's made of earth and who made it and where it came from, right? I can know true things about it through conceptual mind, but it's still got some aspect of mistake, some aspect of like taking the real world and you're just imagining that this thing appearing just to your mental consciousness is a real thing. That's how conceptual mind works. Okay, and it imagines, it sees it as though the thing appearing in your conceptual mind is a real thing. Now, why is that a problem? Why would that be a problem? I mean, I'm claiming it's a problem. Okay, why might it be a problem? Well, let me suggest. Well, because think about all of our. Yeah, Shmuel, go ahead. Or I think Megan will unmute.
Venerable Donyo, had the conceptual mind mistaken the conceptual image for the thing itself, then we would constantly go around thinking that the content of our thoughts is out there. We would think that we can feed ourselves by thinking of food if the conceptual mind would really mistake the image for the thing itself.
Right. Well, that's the thing. It doesn't. So that this is a challenge in our very good point, Shmuel. Very excellent point. So this is a challenge in our language and just kind of having a new theory about cognition and conceptual thought new to the English language, where there's not quite a mature language around to talk about it. So when we say mistaken in this context, it doesn't mean that you believe that your image of the mug in your mind is actually a mug and you could pick it up from, the middle, that you conjure it up in your mind and it comes up there in the space in front of you and you can pick it up and drink from it. But it means that there's the sense that it's like that. It's the word phrasing that we use in Tibetan, the literal way we translate it is that it's appearing to be an actual mark. It's appearing to be the actual object. So you know, right, we don't actually believe that, right? That's a different that would be a different thing. But this leads to the point I was trying to get to. Thank you, Shmuel, for the lead into that, which is that because the appearance to conceptual thought that things that we're just imagining, right, projecting, are actual things in the real world. Well, we actually do get confused by them. This is right. I mean, so much of our mental unwellness, right, ruminating about something that happened yesterday, something someone said to you. We do actually get caught up in things that are purely just a product of our thoughts, right? Or there's that person we don't like, whether they're a public figure, or someone you actually know, someone says something that you find so outrageous, and literally, when you look at the actual situation, there was, 10 seconds, whatever, 30 seconds of some vibrations in the air, the sound waves, right? And they're gone, yet it can leave you ruminating, thinking about it, right? And then you really get full of, right, anger. You can get full of anger from that, right? Or desire or arrogance. Someone praises you, like we talked about before, right? So it's funny because you're the general, like, we were just talking about just in general how conceptual mind works, like in all cases. Every time you have a thought about anything, there is this appearance that the thing you're thinking of really is that thing. It appears that way, but you don't necessarily succumb to that appearance and really think that, right? But at times we sort of do. And again, when you're like sitting there ruminating about, a person that you're mad at, it's not like you don't actually ever go and like, imagine that they're there in front of you and that you could go and like interact with them. It's not like that, but you're so overly influenced by just the fact that you're thinking about them again, right? And you're not getting the point that you're just projecting this, right? That's the thing. You're just creating a narrative. You're just creating a story.
Losang, there's a question in the chat. Samuel asked, is something like gaslighting something that can be considered a mistake in the conceptual mind?
Well, I mean, my understanding of what gaslighting means is when someone knows the truth of a situation, but kind of completely ignoring it, pretends as though or acts as though that's not true, and tries to convince another person that it's not true. So I would say for the second person who gets convinced that it's not true. I mean, I don't know if this term is familiar to everyone. I don't. It's a good example. I don't need to go into too much detail about it. My but basically, like, could you give it maybe, Sam, do you have a good example you could share quickly so it just gets clear for everybody?
I didn't really have a good example. It just came up when you were asking about why mistakes in the conceptual mind might be a problem. Yes. And like in a case like that, the person it's a manipulation technique. It's like deliberately using that as a way to like create these feelings of frustration and anger. Absolutely. In the person being gaslit was kind of just where my question was coming from.
Very good. Yeah, very good point. So I think that makes it clear enough what Sam said. So that's very true. So whether someone's trying to manipulate someone with gaslighting, with propaganda, could be with praise, could be with any of those things, the recipient who actually believes then in this untrue statement or untrue situation, yes, that would be a mistaken conceptual consciousness, a wrong conceptual consciousness, right? And it happens so much. I mean, so many of our beliefs are wrong. I mean, we have this kind of thing going on in the USA right now. I actually don't know how many of you are in the States or in other countries, but I think most of you are in the US from what I can tell. There's these, many sightings of UFOs or UAPs, drones, things like this in the sky. And it's like, yeah, you can believe like there's some, and then that can lead into some conspiracy theory, and and you can believe all these different things. I mean, there's so many conspiracy theories out there now about all sorts of different things. So those, and not to say definitively that they're all mistaken. It's hard to know for sure, but certainly many of them are, right? So that's all. Those kinds of mistaken beliefs are all conceptual consciousness, right? Now, if you actually are out there at night and you see a light go by, then that's your visual consciousness, right? But then if you create some kind of story about it and, oh, it must be, the military, it must be an alien, it must, then that could be, that gets into a conceptual consciousness, right? Okay, so it's all this stuff. Okay, and so just an important note that even if you don't actually have language, animals, babies, etc., they still have conceptual mind. It's just using the imagery without the language. Okay. And conceptual mind, they're all mental. There are no sensory conceptual consciousnesses, right? The eye, ear, nose, tongue, body consciousness, those are all non-conceptual. So what is included then? Well, all the things that we generally think of as our mind, except for those sense consciousnesses, right? Our thoughts, emotions, our memories, our planning, all the executive functioning, that's a term, in psychology and cognitive science. But those activities, right, which include memory, decision making, all these kinds of things, concentration, our imagination and creativity, our reasoning and analysis, the practice of meditation. Right? What you do during meditation is all in your conceptual consciousness. Now, this might be confusing because you could say, well, what are you talking about? I'm meditating on my breath. I'm practicing mindfulness of breathing. How is that conceptual when I'm feeling, right, with my body consciousness, the in and out breath? Well, that's true. But your body consciousness can't decide to focus single pointedly on a given object, right? So it's actually the mental consciousness that's putting in the effort to focus single pointedly on the sensation in your breathing. So it's sort of like a dual, there is the body consciousness there, but then it's the mental consciousness that's sort of overlapped or superimposed over that to actually do the meditation. Okay. So then we have our destructive emotions, our maladaptive cognitions, right? All those things that Geshe-la talked about last week. The 3 root poisons: attachment, anger, ignorance. Those are conceptual. Okay, those are thought. Attachment isn't always, right? Attachment can exist with sense consciousnesses, and ignorance in some ways can as well. But the most severe forms of them, the ones that we really are trying to overcome through practice, meditation. Let's see, Shmuel, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, thank you. If a person pays attention to his breath, then it is mental for the reason you said, but why is it conceptual?
If the person pays attention to their breath, it's conceptual because, well, this we'll get into in another slide a little bit, but basically for the average person, right, which means, anyone who, in this case, what do we mean by average? Anyone who hasn't, made really, really, really prolonged and dedicated efforts in generating very, very stable single pointed concentration. Anyone who hasn't yet done that, basically all of our mental consciousnesses are conceptual, right? They're basically all operating through this medium of a mental image. Now, you might not believe that, and that's good, because that statement or investigating that statement will lead you to becoming more mindful of your mind, right? Of your thoughts. And so you'll start to be able to see if that's true or not, if you're observing more closely. But what that does mean also is that we can sort of create a new kind of consciousness through meditation, and that's a non-conceptual mental consciousness. And that would be, that's really the stage where someone creates that, where they start to really, develop genuine spiritual realizations and become kind of, closer and closer towards awakening. Very good question. So let's see what we have time for. Might have to skip over a couple of things. That's good. Now, just the question on the bottom here, is thought bad? Well, I mean, is that if that's a conclusion that you're coming to through our discussion, I would say that it's not an uncommon conclusion, okay? But it is not the correct conclusion. Not all thought is bad, okay? And actually, I'll just jump to that. There's a separate slide about it. I'll just jump to it now. Okay, so there's a story here, a true story. This is the actual history of Tibet. So when Buddhism came to Tibet, first it came in the 7th century, right? And that was under King Songtsen Gampo. He's the one that had his 16 ministers go to India so they could study, learn the languages, create a Tibetan script so that they could have, their own language, which they could use for both, diplomatic reasons, communicating with China and Mongolia and other neighboring countries, but also for cultural, for the improvement of their own culture, so they could start translating the Dharma in different Indian texts. So only one of these ministers survived. His name was Tomisambodha. So he returned, he created the Tibetan script, translated 21 texts, and that started Buddhism in Tibet under Songtsen Gampo. Okay, 100 years later, so a whole couple generations later, there was another emperor named Trisong Detsen. So Trisong Detsen, he invited Shantarakshita to Tibet to establish the first monastery. So actually, when we're here doing this class with Forest of Wisdom, where our intention and vision is to establish a monastery, starting off small, but when you think of Buddhism in Tibet, there's a whole 100 years of Buddhism in Tibet without any monks or nuns, So it takes time, right? These things take time. So anyway, Shantarakshita developed the first monastery named Samye, still there today. And this was now in the 8th century. Okay. So he then, he was old already when he came to Tibet. He's, a master from India. And then as he was getting older and going to die soon, he told the king to invite his student Kamalashila. Okay, so Kamalashila gets there to Tibet. And then by that time, there's been some time where there's different Buddhist practitioners, different teachers, different ways of practicing, meditating, different ideas. So the people were a little bit confused, like, well, how do we practice? Like, what does it really mean to become enlightened? Okay, so there are the two prevailing views, right? One was the prevailing view from the Chinese tradition. So this was represented by a monk named Hashang Mahayana, who actually came to Tibet. So they organized a big debate. The Emperor Trisong Detsen organized a big debate to decide, well, which path or which type of practice are we going to follow here in Tibet? So Hashang came from China, then Kamalashila came from India, and his perspective was representative of the Nalanda tradition. So the main distinction here, okay, this is how it relates to the question: is conceptual thought bad? So Hashang's view, right, was that all thoughts, all conceptual activity has to be abandoned. It's all obstacles. Just like any cloud, whether it's black, dark cloud, or whether it's a big puffy white cloud, they all obstruct the sky equally. So they all have to be abandoned. Okay. Kamalashila, on the other hand, his view was that that's not the case. We actually need to work with our conceptual thought processes, counteracting the destructive kinds of thoughts with constructive, with positive thoughts, positive emotions, right? We need to make effort to create virtuous ways of thinking and mental habits, as well as compassion, altruism, loving kindness, the 6 perfections, right? Patience, generosity, effort, ethics, patience, joyous effort, concentration, wisdom. And then, over time, like I said, through meditation, you can sort of transform those conceptual minds, those virtuous conceptual minds, into direct experience, into direct perceptions, right? But you can't just say, no, this is all bad. I'm just going to have, no thought, no state of no thought, right? And why? Well, I mean, that's essentially like, if you ever like look at a cow that's like sitting there in a field, if you've seen cows, they just sort of sit there all day, kind of doing nothing, and just basically eat all day if they can, and they just stand there, right? Basically reacting to nothing. Well, you're just becoming like a cow, basically, right? Just kind of sitting there without really having any idea of anything. So, obviously there's more to the arguments than that. Kamalashila's main texts are still, read, studied extensively today. So, and even some of them are in English, so you can check those out. So, conceptual thought is not bad. However, go back, I'm kind of going out of order here, but when you look at the awakened mind, an awakened being, right, they do only have direct perceptions, non-conceptual mind. So awakened beings, completely awakened beings, have no conceptual thought. So this would be only the Buddha, right? The Buddha or someone at that same level. Or this lady in the photo here may very well be a Buddha. We have no way of knowing. Anyway, again, it was a stock photo. What can you do? Okay. Okay, so now we'll just go through, and the time as always is going much more quickly than I had expected, but this is good. What is direct experience then? So I want to point out something that this is kind of, it's a challenge again in terminology, but it's a good challenge because it causes us again to reflect in different ways, to watch our own experience, to observe. This first point is very important. In general, okay, all consciousness is experience, right? That was one of the first points I made the last class 2 weeks ago. Experience, mind, consciousness, awareness, those are all equivalent terms, right? Or synonymous, essentially, right? So your thoughts are experience. And why is that important to understand? Well, because of that point Kamalashila was making, right? If you talk about meditating on ultimate reality, which we call emptiness of inherent existence, okay? That's probably a completely new term for some of you. For some of you, it's a very, very old term, and you know all about it. But anyway, ultimate reality is called the emptiness of inherent existence, okay, of all phenomena, of all objects. So you can have an extremely profound, life-changing experience of that with your conceptual mind before you ever get to the point of having a direct perception of it, right? So it's not like the conceptual thought processes are unimportant or ineffective. They're just not the final stage of a completely awakened being. Same thing with altruism and bodhicitta, right? Altruism. You can have a strong compassion that permeates your entire being, and that really causes you to dedicate your whole life to caring for others. And it still could be completely conceptual, right? So conceptual mind has a wide range, a very wide range, and it includes many kinds of experiences as well. But when we're talking about direct experience, now that means direct experience means without that conceptual overlay or that mental image. Okay, so there are two different things, even though the conceptual mind also has deep experiences. Is it making sense? I hope so. Okay. Okay. So, as I said before, all sensory consciousness is non-conceptual. Okay. And then some mental consciousnesses also are, but really not many until you develop. You have to work to develop those. Okay. There could be some exceptions, like maybe some like dreams, for instance, can have some mental, like in dreams, there's no sensory consciousness. Your senses are all deactivated, right? But you can have direct perception, or I should say non-conceptual mental consciousness. Okay, and then but then the next point is where I just corrected myself. Not all non-conceptual minds are direct perception. So direct perception is actually a very specific subset of non-conceptual. Okay, direct perception is a specific subset because it excludes the mistaken sensory consciousnesses, right? Like that example I gave earlier. So that is so when you see with your eyes, some object on the road and you mistake it for an animal, right? That is non-conceptual, but it's not considered a direct perception. Now, this is, again, like a technical terminology here. So really, for the purpose of today, Venerable Puja will go into more detail about that in a few weeks. Okay, so this is just about creating this new sensory modality with meditation of the direct mental perception. The only thing I'll talk about here with this slide is this example, okay? So if you just think about it, right? When you concentrate something, right, it changes it. It gives it more power, right? That's the point of distilling, of concentrating something, right? So concentrating the mind gives it new abilities. Now, this is like the entire basis, basically, for the entirety of Indian culture. It's a very spiritual culture, and it's like all founded on this understanding that yoga, right? That mental training, yoga not meaning physical exercises, but the overall practice of mental training. That I mean, yoga meaning, to unify or unite, right? Meaning like bringing your, I mean, it can have many different connotations depending on context, but here just meaning like bringing all the, disparate parts of your mind together into one single pointed stream of concentration, right? So that does something that you never had before. It gives you an ability you never had before. So what's an example? Like nuclear power, right? Nuclear power, you have this big mountain of rocks, okay, but somehow you manage to get a little bit of uranium out of there, and then through processing, I can't say that word right now. You process it, and then you get nuclear power, and you can actually, have a whole city run for a day because you were able to take something and concentrate it, right? And also, we know pressure washers or fire hoses, right? You concentrate the stream of water and it becomes much more powerful. Or just a strong river, a river flow, right? Okay, so this is what happens when we develop concentration. We can develop new abilities with our mind, and one of them is to have direct mental perception. And this is also, we also can develop something called yogic direct perception. Okay. So let's see, maybe not time to go through this one, but you can look at it later. Okay, now this is really what I wanted to get to. Actually, there is one thing I'll say we're very close. Okay, well, just because I wanted to touch it, there's not even a slide about it, but there's enough on here. And again, it will go on the website shortly or tomorrow, so that people can read it if you want to. But when we talk about living in the moment, this is something I think is very important. This also can very, very easily be interpreted as, right, understood as what Hashang Mahayana's view was, the Chinese monk who came to debate in Tibet several hundred years ago, right, over 1,000 years ago, which is being in the moment means that you're just completely, fully there with your senses, your sense consciousness, and there's no thought going on, right? Has anyone had that sense of what being in the moment means? or maybe even heard it. They even like heard it explicitly taught that way sometimes, right? Okay, well, that's not really what being in the moment means. I mean, your conceptual thought processes are part of you, right? They're in the moment too, right? Your conceptual thinking is also there. Now, the thing that leads to, though, why would someone think of being in the moment that way is because when your conceptual thoughts are like mine, and maybe a lot of us, which means like constantly thinking, constantly mixed with destructive emotions and destructive thoughts, right? Constantly mixed with things like attachment and anger, and literally constantly, right? I mean, this is not an exaggeration. Then to just stop it and just give yourself some peace feels like you're now, at a new height of spiritual living, right? And you are that. I mean, putting a pause to that is something beneficial, something powerful. But what that leads us to next, the next step then is to see, but what actually is allowing you to live in the moment isn't that your conceptual thoughts are gone or stopped. It's that you now have some mental peace. You now have some space. So you can be aware of whatever arises, whether it's a physical experience or sensory experience, or if it's a conceptual one, right? The point is, you can be in the moment if you train your conceptual mind to have more positive habits, right? Have more positive habits. Be thinking more of compassion when you meet someone on the street, instead of thinking, oh, they're walking too fast, or they're they scowled at me instead of smiling, all the billions of different things we can think that make us angry, right? Instead, we just think, oh, there is another kind sentient being, just like me. They want happiness just like me. I wish you well. I wish you have happiness. And if you can train your mind to think that way, then you're always going to be living in the moment, because you're not pulled out of the moment. You're not pulled out of being present with yourself by this kind of rumination that's getting you stuck in some narrative and some false projection and some story, right? It's still conceptual, but your conceptual mind is now in line with reality. There really is another sentient being over there who wants happiness just like you. They really do deserve it just as much as you. That's true. So the actual reaction of compassion is more realistic. It's more in line with reality. It's not going to pull you into this, hellish world of your own creation. It's going to allow you to live at peace in the present. Okay. So that's one point. And so this now, just to close up with this slide here, it's related to what I was just saying, is that there's this basic, this is essentially what the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism is all about, and in some sense all of Buddhism, but like I said, there are some other ways of thinking about practice and meditation. That's okay. But really, what we're doing when we're meditating and when we're studying is learning how to counteract our negative thought processes with positive thought processes, right? This is what meditation is about, and study. Study is to give us an understanding of why our negative thought processes are wrong, are mistaken, and how to correct them. But the point is that we have to use an exact opposite, right? So if we have an attachment that is imbuing, projecting, right, some kind of extra special beauty, extra special, just some quality that's exaggerated beyond what's really there, then what you need to do is see the exact opposite. Actually, this object has flaws, right? My mug that I love so much because it has a picture of my kamsen, which is where it's like in the monastery, it's divided up like into different colleges essentially. This is my kamsen, so I love it because it's mine. It's my place. And it seems so beautiful. But when I have attachment, I have to remember the exact opposite. Well, And the opposite doesn't mean to say that, you know, it doesn't have any, it has no good qualities. No, that wouldn't be the opposite, right? Just that it has impermanence, right? It has the problems of, you know, getting dirty, and then you have to go wash it, right? Or someone steals it, and then you have to go to the police and file a lawsuit because it's so valuable. You know, so, you know, it has problems, right? So that's what you do with attachment. With anger, it's the opposite, right? You see the person that you're angry at. You know, obviously it cannot, doesn't have to be a person. If you're angry, if you're irritated by physical pain, right? You recognize that, well, this pain is something that it's just an existent thing. If I can get rid of the anger and just experience it, then it's actually not so bad anymore. And it can actually make me stronger. In other words, it has positive value. It can make my mind more able to deal with pain. It can make me, you know, in other words, it's a cause for training in resilience, right? So pain can be good. If it's another person, you see that that person, right? They have a family that they love. They have hobbies and interests, and they like their favorite music star, and they like their favorite movie, and they have all these desires and all these dreams, right? And they have their own suffering and they have their own anger that makes them, you know, that they can't control, and then that makes them act in bad ways. And so they're actually worthy of not our hatred, but our compassion. Right? Okay,